to be back. I don't know, you governor, president, Janet, you know, like
Yeah.
Madam Secretary, what do you like?
I go by many names.
Yeah, governor. You were governor of Arizona, you were Secretary of Homeland Security, and now you're president of the University of California. And these are three very big systems roles. And I'm interested in how your own personal thinking has evolved about what infrastructure is.
Well, I think when you're a governor, you're really focused, like listening to Terry a few minutes ago, you're focused on roads and bridges.
Were you like him? Were you like, yeah, I did this, I did this?
Yeah, sure. You know, you're a salesperson for your state, and your state is the best state, and it will always be the best state, et cetera. You know, Secretary of Homeland Security, you are concerned with the safety and resilience of the nation's infrastructure at a much more fundamental level, and you're thinking a lot about disaster scenarios. You know, what happens if there's the big earthquake? What happens during hurricane season? What happens if you know, there's a major oil spill right in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico and nobody quite knows how to cap the well? So you're constantly thinking about the what-if scenarios and the resilience of the nation's infrastructure, including our cyber infrastructure, which we could talk about later. Now at the University of California, which is the nation's largest and best public research university, I'm talking about the nation's intellectual infrastructure. How do we make sure that we are growing the young minds necessary to do the kind of advancements that you know, the American economy has always depended on? We're always ahead. Why? Because we are the most innovative. Well, we're not innovative just by accident. We're innovative because, you know, we have focused on this, and particularly through our university system, we invest in it, correct.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you say, given where you think we need to be, our intellectual infrastructure is today?
Well, I think the brains are there, but I think that there needs to be more investment in this. It is an undervalued exercise. And when I say exercise, it's not really the right word. It's an undervalued investment. It's an investment that pays off in jobs and economic activity. When you look at a state like California, which over time has invested in its university system and then has some private universities to go along with it, it's no accident that places like Silicon Valley end up in California. It's no accident that the other center of innovation in the United States is in the Boston-Cambridge area. I mean, these things are intimately related, and then they create jobs and opportunities all around the country. So now when you talk about roads and bridges, I was thinking back to when they constructed the Bay Bridge, linking San Francisco to Oakland, or Hoover Dam, the major waterworks projects. Well, there were 5 different kinds of cement invented to be able to do a Hoover Dam, and the research for those kinds of cement was done at the University of California. So it's a, you know, not all research is esoteric.
When you become president of the university, they say, here are these neat facts. We invented the special cement for Hoover Dam. What else is in that book?
I have lots of pieces of information, yes, but it seemed appropriate for the topic.
Okay, we do have a lot in the audience here, a lot of people thinking about, you know, roads and bridges and grids and all of that. You just mentioned cyber.
Right.
And one of the challenges, I always think of the very Atlantic-y kind of challenge for us, is to imagine what this conversation should look like 20 years from now. What problems should we have solved? And as you're such a technology innovator in the university and player, how do you think, what is your message to people here thinking about these infrastructure systems? Because Donald Trump seems very committed to drop $1 trillion or $2 trillion on the system. What should we be thinking about that might be blind spots for us as we think about infrastructure?
We should be thinking about resilience. We should be thinking about, you know, believe the science of climate change or not. The numbers are the numbers, the impacts are the impacts, and where we build things, how we build them, what kinds of materials are used, how we come back from a disaster. Resilience ought to be the watchword when we talk about new infrastructure.
You know, I've just been reading about Eisenhower and the National Highway System and what that was, and there was a very, very big national security component to the rationale for funding what became the domestic, major domestic infrastructure, the
Sure.
artery system. How much do you think that as we think about retrofitting our infrastructure, you mentioned cyber, should we frame in national security circumstances, or do you think that's a false frame?
No, I don't think it's a false frame at all. And cyber's the best example of that. And I remember one time when I was secretary, myself and the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence and the head of the FBI, we all went to a private briefing for members of the Senate and the House, and we were talking about the infrastructure for the power grid. And what it would take to impact the infrastructure for the power grid. And we were trying to communicate with that physical demonstration. It was like, there was a show and tell. Here's what would happen. These are the domino effects. But to get some legislation through that would, at a minimum, clarify some roles and begin the process of setting some cyber standards. I don't think we're there yet. I think it's something this next administration will need to take on.
Where are we? It's hard. You're basically, University of California is like a small country. I'm sure you've been hacked. Have you been hacked?
Many times.
Many times. So how vulnerable are we in your sense because I think it's a very big influence. Alex Gibney has just done this great film called 0 Days, and it's about Stuxnet. But when you get beyond it and begin looking at infrastructure in critically important things like grids and power systems and water systems, election systems. You used to be on the other side of the intelligence veil. How screwed are we?
Well, I think we are vulnerable. And I think that this is one of the key risks that the next administration is going to have to take on. I know at the University of California, so this is a system that has 10 campuses and academic health centers, big academic hospitals, and national labs, including Los Alamos. I know that we get hacked. The amount that we are spending to harden ourselves and to monitor hacks is quite significant. I'm not sure that other institutions are doing the same. There are no standards that really require other institutions to do the same. So we have created an unequal system that has a set of vulnerabilities.
Do you think that needs to change?
Yes, I do.
Do we need standards?
Oh, yes, I do.
So what would you tell us very clearly the Janet Napolitano request on standards?
I would say if I ran the world and if I were chair of the Homeland Security committees in either the Senate or the House, I would revisit cybersecurity and the legislation passed there. It is not adequate to protect the country.
What do you think your specialists, when it comes to technology and smart data and whatnot, innovations, how are they filling out today's actual real physical infrastructure?
Oh, many, many different ways. I'll give you an example, LED lighting. We have an LED lighting center at UC Santa Barbara. And for municipalities, towns that are having to have lighting for roads and for safety and other reasons, much cheaper, it's a much better source of lighting. And there are new developments technologically that are happening in that world, and they are emanating from a center at UC Santa Barbara. And I could give you other examples, but there's great interest in the university community in how we design the next, the next vision of the U.S., U.S. 2.0, so to speak. What does our transportation system look like? How is it controlled? What is done robotically? What is done manually? How do we make sure that it is resilient in the face of catastrophic climatic events? So those are the kinds of things that deserve study.
One of the other things, I spent some time recently with Richard Florida, whom I'm sure you know, Rise of the Creative Class. He has a new book coming out called The New Urban Crisis. He and Joel Kotkin have basically said the United States is a nation of two countries. And you've got the urban creative class, you have others that are there, and that trying to kind of link all of these is a real challenge. And I'm interested how you sort of see the soul of the country right now. And you're one of the great centers of intellectual excellence. What do you think we're not reaching to other parts of the country that may not be on that same wavelength?
I think when you work in a university setting, it's filled with hope. I mean, it's people building their futures and creativity. That's all going on. I'm not sure that same sense of opportunity is extant throughout the United States. Even though when you look at what the work we do at the University of California, what the work we perform, it affects rural California in humongous ways. New developments in agriculture, by way of example, new types of crops, new ways of planting. You know, we have people in every county in California working with the grower community in terms of how we make sure that California remains the food basket of the United States. So there are impacts out in other places in the country, but that kind of sense of activity and creativity, hope and change, I'm not sure is reaching everywhere.
When you're looking at your dashboard running this system, you know, David Bradley, our owner, always says, what are your hard choices? What are those points where you want to move somewhere, but you're constrained, you know it's important, but what are the hard choices you have to make when it comes to some of these questions about investment?
Running a university in this era, a public university, is very challenging because nobody wants to pay for it. States have disinvested. Even California has disinvested quite a bit since the recession. Tuition, nobody wants students to pay more in tuition. And research money, although we do very well, we probably get close to 10% of the federal research money that is appropriated comes into the University of California.
The UC system, you get 10%?
Yeah, but that funding has remained fairly stagnant and is a lost opportunity for the country. So tremendous pressure on keeping costs down while you try to maintain excellence, and you have to maintain the kinds of facilities and support for faculty and the like that create these innovations, that do this basic research.
You've also been a big defender of just keeping an open door to talent that walks in the door, and now there's greater focus and controversy on the question of dreamers that are in the country, undocumented students. You know, I'm just interested in your theory there, and what do you see coming, and how do you keep an open door given the political changes that we see coming in the country?
Right. So this involves a program that I hatched and the president announced when I was secretary, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival, the Dreamers. These are young people. They were brought here, they were raised here, they've done very well, they've done everything we've asked of them, they don't have a criminal record, they've had a security background check. Academically, they got into the University of California, which is not easy. You have to at least be in the top 12.5% of your class to do so. Why would we export those talents and those brains? Why would we deport them to countries that they may have little, if any, relationship to? In terms of prioritizing immigration enforcement, it makes absolutely no sense. And so I'm hopeful that as the new administration settles in and really begins to understand how you prioritize in immigration enforcement and makes a serious effort, as we did with felons and gang members and security threats, you know, that is where your law enforcement ought to be.
Also, just before we go to the audience, I'm also interested in the fact that you are you're an outstanding female leader, that you've been a governor, a secretary, a president of the University of California system. I think I was just reading that only 1/4 of university presidents are women. And that's another dimension of infrastructure or talent, and the table is not there. How do you think it's going? We have folks here. What lessons do you have from the kinds of things you've done to women in the pipeline of talent, trying to reach some of these premier positions of responsibility?
Well, I think pipelines are important. I think experience is important. And we're doing a lot within the university community to diversify and to make sure that there are opportunities, particularly in fields that are gender imbalanced or underrepresented minority imbalanced. That's particularly true in areas like high tech. Well, what can we do? Well, we make sure we support students, we encourage them, we have summer programs, we foster internships, all those kinds of things.
Do you feel like it's making a difference? We're doing a forum in California on inclusion in Silicon Valley, which is a challenge. What are the things they need to do to both get more women in top ranks, get more...
They need to get it. They just need to get it. And they don't get it. That there's a huge talent source out there that they are not adequately accessing that would help them. And so what we're trying to do is work with them, work with our students, see if we can bridge that gap.
Are you candid with them?
I can be very candid, yes.
With that, let me open the floor. Who has comments or questions for Janet Napolitano? Yes, right here in the front. Great.
Peter Pennington, resident of Virginia and a British observer of the American way of life.
How's it going?
I'm interested in what intellectual thought is going into the infrastructure of the future. For instance, it has been said in 20 years' time, there'll be no commercial pilots, there'll be no air traffic control, no anesthetists. Who knows, Metro might actually have driverless trains. Permits, we were talking about earlier, could all be resolved by algorithm. Society is changing fast. What intellectual thought's going into that?
Thank you. Great question.
I think quite a bit, because you have to think not just of the now, but in a way the leapfrog. What could be? What could happen? What are the possibilities? And the costs and benefits associated with each, the likelihood, et cetera. I think one of the challenges for the U.S. economy and the world economy generally is the whole issue of what are the jobs of the future. Because so much more now can be automated. Well, should it be automated? You know, what opportunities are there, and is the way we have the labor market organized going to match what the labor market needs are going to be in 20 or 30 years? So yes, a great deal of thought is going into that.
Do you think, Janet, that the concern that there won't be jobs, that we're automating in so many different categories, that you just have faith that the job equation is going to work itself out? Or do you think there are legitimate reasons for concern that that balance between positions and opportunities? I mean, I think that's part of what Brexit was about. Steve Hilton, the husband of Rachel Whetstone of Uber, wrote this book called More Human. It was positioned from the right, saying we need to turn productivity into a bad word because it's leaving the human piece out of productivity and advancement. And do you think that's a legitimate debate?
I think it's not a debate. I think it's an issue. It's a problem. We need to think through this. Because we don't want to become kind of Luddites and turn away from technology on the grounds that it will take away a job. But we need to be thinking about, well, what are the jobs of the future? What level of education will they require? What are the jobs that cannot be outsourced and will need to be local? One of the reasons I'm doing an infrastructure big project for the next president is those jobs are right here. And you can't, you know, if you're building a railroad or a bridge or et cetera, you can't outsource that to another country. But it's a globalized world. There's globalized trade. How do you deal with other types of work?
Other questions? Yes, Stephanie.
Sorry. You just spoke actually of outsourcing and of how the University of California is a part of the U.S. infrastructure, both as a whole, as who it builds and its employees. How does that relate to UC San Francisco's recent decision to outsource hundreds of IT jobs, which are a part of that infrastructure, and is this something to expect more of?
Yeah, so that was a pilot project. I don't know if it was hundreds, but it was some. And it has since been rescaled back because I don't think they used the H-1B process in the right way. You know, we need the flexibility. As I mentioned before, we're under tremendous cost constraints to outsource in appropriate times, but I don't see it being something that we commonly do. We want to work with our workers and with our full-time workers. That's our top priority. But there will be outsourcing, no doubt, and there will be outsourcing in any large institution.
Other questions? Yes, Stacy? There you go. Well, it looks like we're it. Let me just ask you in one last question. You also have national security laboratories, I think. Don't you have part
We
of
have three of them.
Yeah, three.
Yeah.
And I am interested in another dimension, which is advanced energy infrastructure. I had the opportunity to interview the governor at the big ARPA-E conference, I think last year. What are the things that we need to get right on the energy front, and what could we get wrong?
You know, I think we have to understand that there is a relationship between our energy infrastructure and our climate and our long-term future. That's why I keep saying when you talk about infrastructure, you have to talk about resilience. We're seeing those impacts now. If you live in South Florida, you're building differently than you would have built even 10 years ago. So these are not hypothetical constructs. And so we have to think about an energy infrastructure for the United States that takes advantage of the knowledge that we now have, but builds infrastructure that marries with the kind of energy that we should be producing.
When you scratch just beneath the visibility that we all see, and you get to see a little bit more because you're at the head of the system, where are we in terms of the University of California's contributions on that energy picture?
Yeah, well, we have a goal
Are we going to get fusion?
Yeah,
we have a fusion lab, right?
Yeah. I'm not going to talk about that here, but I will say the university as a whole, we have a goal of being carbon neutral by 2025. We just made the largest purchase of solar power ever by a university. We're using every other kind of source of power supply to show that a big, complex institution like the University of California can be run efficiently and effectively, but in a carbon neutral way.
Have you reached out to President-elect Trump yet?
No, and I haven't written him a letter either, but maybe it will come.
Maybe it will come. Ladies and gentlemen, President of the University of California, Janet Napolitano.
Thank you
very,
all.
very
Thanks,
much.
Steve.
Thank you.